Music and Identity, Simon Fried. Henry Rollins once said that music exists to put furniture in your mind because life is so cruel and TV is so mean. Gina Arnold. Becoming what one is a creative act comparable with creating a work of art. Anthony Storr. It is not easy, however, to be evil when music is playing. John Miller Chernoff. The academic study of popular music has been limited by the assumption that the sounds must somehow reflect or represent the people. The analytic problem has been to trace the connections back from the work, the score, the song, the beat, to the social groups who produce and consume it. What's being at issue is homology, some sort of structural relationship between material and music forms. The research from homology is most commonly associated these days with subculture theory, with accounts of punk of heavy metal, for example. But the supposed fit or lack of fit between aesthetics and social values has a much longer history in the study of popular culture. This is T.S. Eliot on Mary Lloyd. It was her understanding of the people and sympathy with them, and the people's recognition of the fact that she embodied the virtues which they genuinely most respected in private life that raised her to the position she occupied at her death. I have called her the expressive figure of the lower classes. More recently, the rise of identity politics has meant new assertions of cultural essentialism, more forceful arguments than ever that, for example, only African Americans can appreciate African American music, that there is a basic difference between male and female composition, that the globalization of a local sound is a form of cultural genocide. The assumptions in such arguments about the necessary flow from social identity, whether defined in terms of race or sexuality, or age or nation, to musical expression and appreciation seem straightforward enough in the abstract. Who could possibly deny that African American music is music made by African Americans? That the difference between male and female experience will be embedded in male and female music? That Phil Collins is an imposition on the soundscape of the Australian outback? But they are less convincing in the everyday practice of music making and listening. How do we make sense of the obvious love of European listeners and players for the music of the African diaspora? Who is expressing that when, say, Ella Fitzgerald sings Cole Porter, when Yoti Gindi rocks? The problem here is not just the familiar postmodern point that we live in an age of plunder in which musics made in one place for one reason can be immediately appropriated in other place for quite another person, but also while music may be shaped by the people who first make and use it. As experience has a life of its own. Marx remarks somewhere that it is easy enough to move analytically from the cultural to the material. Easy enough that is to interpret culture, to read it ideologically, to assign it social conditions. The difficult trick is to do the analysis the other way around, to show how the base produced this superstructure, to explain why an idea or experience takes on this artistic or aesthetic form and not other, equally reflective or representative on its conditions of production. After the cultural event, as a historian might agree, we can say why expression had to happen this way. Before it, there is no creative necessity at all. And if art is therefore, so to speak, originally accidental, then there is no particular reason to accept its maker's special claims on it. The interesting question, rather, is how art comes to make its own claims in other circumstances for itself. In examining the aesthetics of popular music, then, I want to reserve the usual academic and critical argument. The issue is not how a particular piece of music or a performance reflects the people, but how it produces them. How it creates and constructs an experience, a musical experience, an aesthetic experience that we can only make sense of by taking on both a subjective and collective identity. The aesthetic, to put this another way, describes the quality of an experience, not the quality of an object. It means experiencing ourselves, not just the world, in a different way. My argument here, in short, rests on two premises. First, that identity is mobile, is a process, not a thing, a becoming, not a being. Second, that our experience of music making and music listening is best understood as an experience of this self-in process. Music, like identity, is both performance and story, describes the social and the individual in the individual and the individual in the social, the mind in the body and the body in the mind. Identity, like music, is a matter of both ethics and aesthetics. In exploring these themes, I will, among other things, touch critically on their treatment under the label of postmodernism. But my main concern is to suggest that if music is a metaphor for identity, then, to echo Marx, the self is always an imagined self, but can only be imagined as a particular organization of social, physical, and material forces. The mobile self. What's at stake has become clear in the debate about postmodernism and the unstable of the centered subject, a debate which has been dominated by the problems of signification and structure. Postmodernism, that is to say, is taken to describe a crisis of signification systems. How can we now tell the difference between the real and the simulated? The postmodern problem is the threat to our sense of place. Hence the mapping metaphor, the use of terms like depth and surface. What is underplayed in such discussions is the problem of process, not the positioning of the subject as such, but our experience of the movement between positions. This is where music becomes an important area for study. What happens to our assumptions about postmodern identity when we examine a form in which sound is more important than sight, and time more important than space? when the text is a performance, a movement, a flux, when nothing is represented. The broad argument that I want to make here, in short, is that in talking about identity, we are talking about a particular kind of experience or a way of dealing with a particular kind of experience. Identity is not a thing but a process, an experimental process which is most vividly grasped as music. Music seems to be a key to identity because it offers to so intensely a sense of both self and others, of the subjective and in the collective. As Marx Slobin puts it, music seems to have an odd quality that even passionate activities like gardening or dog raising lack. The simultaneous projecting and dissolving of the self in performance, individual, family, gender, age, supercultural givens, and other factors hover around the musical space but can penetrate only very partially the moment of enactment of musical fellowship. Visible to the observer, these constraints remain unseen by the musicians, who are instead working out a shared vision that involves both the assertion of pride, even ambition, and the simultaneous disappearance of the ego. The experience of identity describes both a social process, a form of interaction, and an aesthetics process. As Slobin argues, it is the aesthetic rather than organizational contextual aspects of performance that betray the continuity between the social, the group, and the individual. It is in deciding, playing, and hearing what sounds right. I will extend this account of music from performing to listening as a way of performing that we both express ourselves or our own sense of rightness and suborn ourselves, lose ourselves in an act of participation. The implication of this argument is that we need to rethink the usual sociological approach to aesthetics expression. My point is not that a social group has beliefs which it then articulates in its music, but that music, an aesthetic practice, articulate in itself an understanding of both groups' relations and individuality, on the basis of which ethical codes and social ideologies are understood. What I want to suggest, in other words, is not that social groups agree on values which are then expressed in their cultural activities, the assumption of the homology models, but that they only get to know themselves as groups, as a particular organization of individual and social interests, of sameness and difference, through cultural activity, through aesthetics judgment. Making music isn't a way of expressing ideas, it is a way of living them. As John Miller Chernoff concluded from his study of drumming in Ghana, African music is a cultural activity which reveals a group of people organizing and involving themselves with their own communal relationships. A participant observer's comment, so to speak, on the processes of living together. The aesthetic point on the exercise is not to reflect a reality which stands behind it, but to ritualize a reality that is within it. And this is not just a characteristic of African music. Philip V. Bollman concludes his study of the role of chamber music in the lives of the Yekes, the German-speaking Jews in Israel, as follows. But this essay is not really about an ethnic group, not nor it is about the music per se and that group, though I am here concerned with the music history resulting from the response of a group with a shared value system to a musical repertoire that articulated those values. Such groups have long populated the history of Western music. Sometimes we call them ethnic groups or communities, sometimes national cultures, and sometimes we label by coupling place with abstraction. For example, in Viennese classicism, all these acts of labeling suggest the process of standing outside a group and looking into see what sort of music is to be found. Suppose the group is really the product of its musical activities and the cultural values bound to them. What if excessive concern with the musical text deflects one from seeing the formation of diverse groups and music histories? What if one looked at the Yekes with their devotion to chamber music as just another justification for the conditions of absolute music? Bollmann's target here is musicology. As an ethnomusicologist, he is arguing that the meaning of classical music as an experience is not to be found in the text, but in the performance of the text, in the process in which it is realized. The Yeke Chamber Music Group don't have an abstract belief in absolute or transcendent music. Rather, the concept of absolute music is dependent on a particular way of being, playing together. Bollmann's argument is particularly interesting because it is applied to high music making. His suggestion, with which I strongly agree, is that in terms of aesthetic process, there is no real difference between high and low music. As he notes, from his perspective, Western art music functions not unlike styles and repertoires, most commonly accepted as the ethnomusicologists field, namely folk and non-Western music. And I will add, from my perspective, not unlike commercial popular music either. In short, different sorts of musical activity may produce different sorts of musical identity, but how the music works to form identities is the same. The distinction between high and low culture, in other words, describes not something caused by different class-bound tastes, but is an effect of different class-bound social activities. Let me make the point in a different way by quoting two music critics, one low and one high, and then considering the difference between them. First, the low critic Frank Cogan, writing about Spoony Gree in a fanzine in the mid-1980s. Spooning Rap and Love Rap by Spoony Gree are my favorite American-made records of the last 10 years. They came about 5 years ago. Spooning Rap in late 79 and Love Rap in 80s. I've never read a review of either. On the basis of his voice alone, the way it balances coolness with angry passion while keeping a dance beat, Spoony is a major artist. In addition, he is a writer. His lyrics are as intense as his singing and embody the same tensions. Example, both Spoony Rap and Love Rap start with detailed and explicit bragging about how cool and sexy he is, about how girls go for him, how they are impressed with his rapping and his car. He puts on his 8-track. He makes love to the girl in his car, in his Mercedes, the seat so soft, just like a bed. At the moment of sexual triumph, the lyrics make a jarring change, as if there's a second song hiding behind the first. as if the bragging were a setup for something else. And then it's like the first part of the song, but turned inside out. The guys and girls are drawn to his flashy clothes and car only so they can rip him off and leaves him in the gutter. The girls are gonna play him for a fool. Then it shifts back to what a great lover he is. Nice descriptions of his girlfriends. Spooning rap shifts around the same way. It's about how cool he is, about how sexy women are. Then it's about don't to dope, don't steal. You will go to jail and they will fuck you in the ass. Then it's about jumping the turnstile and the cop pulls a gun, but he doesn't shot.